this governor loves his dashboards. He loves his metrics. He loves reinventing Michigan. But as part of the dashboard, I talked about, how's the economy? And he says, hey, this is the 6th fastest growing in the nation. Then he went on to talk about income levels rising. Let's take a look at this clip from the governor this week.
Income levels are doing well in our state. If you look at the rate of income growth in our state, we're the 9th fastest state in the United States in terms of per capita income growth. That's a great number. If you look at employment, private sector employment, since our low point in 2009, we've added over 177,000 jobs, and we're going to keep going.
So let's put all this into context. In office has made a lot of change to improve the economic and the business atmosphere in the state. I mean, I guess both of you have some differing views on this, but what has he done right over the years? I mean, obviously regulations have been cut. There have been some tax reforms in the past few years. Is this generating the steam that he's wanted all along?
We've done a lot of things right. When we took office, when the Republicans took office in 2 years ago in that last term, we set out, we knew what our priority was jobs. We want to increase jobs and put our families back to work so they no longer have to leave this state. And to do that, we had a three-legged stool of tax reform, getting our fiscal house in order, and really doing sound fiscal budget practices and regulatory reform. And we've done a lot of those. They weren't all easy to do, but for the first time, we've gotten rid of our Michigan business tax, which was a job killer here, and in addition to getting rid of costly regulatory burdens, red tape elimination, and then really doing our budget without not only on time but early, but without any fixes, gimmicks, one-time shows, and funny money. That has started to show real results, and that's what the public demanded of their legislators. For the first time in a decade, more people think Michigan is on the right track versus going the wrong direction. Unemployment is declining and personal income is growing. Those are numbers that you can see.
Yeah, I have a little bit different take on it. The growth in Michigan has actually been quite slow. The 177,000 jobs, most of those are from the auto industry. Auto industry is the biggest industry in the state. And the governor had nothing to do with the turnaround of the auto industry. That was because of the investments that were made prior to his governor in the what's it called, the money that we gave the auto industry.
The bailout.
I'm losing the bailout. That's it.
Some people call
yeah.
it bailout.
The bailout, right?
It's called a loan.
Okay. In terms of tax reform, the average person, middle class, working class, working poor, in the next 90 days, it's going to hit us. We're going to see that we no longer get the homestead property tax credit. We no longer get $600 per child tax credit. We no longer get our charity deductions. Earned income tax credit is much lower, affecting the low earner. And then on top of that, and I agree that the PPT had to go away, personal property tax for business had to go away. Everybody agrees on that. The problem is it was not replaced fully. And talk to anybody in municipal government, city government, or even the schools, and what effect that change will have on their income. In in Whitehall, which is not in my district, but in the adjoining district, they will lose 45% of their income because of the PPT. And we're going to be working with them to trying to work out some fixes. But there are some changes that have not been all that great. In terms of average income levels, I think the governor's figures, I've seen figures that show that the average income in Michigan has gone down. And when you think about just your neighbors and your friends and your family members, how they've gone from high-paying jobs to lower-paying jobs, or full-time to part-time, or they're on unemployment or whatever, they're not experiencing higher incomes. So we have a little bit different take on it.
There's an area actually where I do agree with Representative Hovey Wright, and that is I believe individuals are paying too much in taxes. And I'm really looking forward over this term, as our economy comes back, as we make I'm okay with a slow comeback, because that slow and steady wins the race, and that's okay for me. As our economy makes a comeback, I'd love to look at how we can provide individuals more tax relief, whether it's from real property taxes. In the House, we passed an income tax reduction this last term, and I hope we can kind of keep that discussion going. So there's just a whole lot we can do, because this isn't about middle class. This isn't about any class. This is about everyone. This is all of our state, and we just need
But
to
all
make.
those tax changes were done by the Republican-controlled legislature and the governor, and people are going to see what those tax changes are going to be doing in the next 90 days when
They're
they do their
increasing
own.
jobs.
Yeah, well, in the auto industry, which the governor can't take credit for.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, more on the State of the State post-mortem discussion in just 1 minute. For you, I know that you, Greg, you had a chance to go up in the Michigan State Police helicopter. I'm sure that was something memorable for you.
Well, it was stunning. The devastation, both east and west of Grand Rapids, was incredible. I think it will take years for some people to recover. It looked like you were looking at the Mississippi River. It was very, very wide. The only thing unusual were houses and trees in the middle of it. And it was that way east of Grand Rapids, and it really didn't look like the Grand River, although a lot higher, until you got into Grand Rapids, where it was confined by the flood walls. And then in Grand Haven, the river might have been a mile wide. It was incredible.
I know, Zane, you and your staff were out and about with your boots on and your waders. Just for you as a reporter, is there something that sticks out in your mind from the week's events?
Yeah, well, I actually started working Sunday morning and went Sunday, April 21st, and went over to where they were filling sandbags. There was about 300 volunteers. And it struck me because there was people, like the Forest Hills crew team was out there. There were 2 guys ran down in running gear and just kind of panting asked to be given shovels and sand to fill the bags. And it kind of stood out to me that there was a lot of, pulling together that the city was doing on this. But I had been out of town over the weekend, so I was just kind of getting back into the swing of things. And it struck me when I got back that there was something bad was afoot.
And that's something that I think we will all remember from that. I know the mayor and your department were out front congratulating the people that were volunteering and really thankful for that hard work. And WMIAC, you were behind getting a lot of those people to come out and help. There's something impressive about this community when it comes to volunteerism.
Let me jump in before Rachel this time. WMIAC was an incredible partner for us. We did something we've never done before, and to try to overnight corral volunteers that were absolutely essential in our response. And WMIAC, they have lots of friends, and when they put the word out, people came a-running, and we had people 50 miles away drive up in church school buses Sunday morning and drop people off. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm. I think we also learned that the Grand River has many, many friends. People care about this river, they care about our Great Lakes, and as a result of that, we saw people coming from throughout the region, from all walks of life, all demographics. It was incredibly powerful to our team to see that great response. On Thursday night, our team went to sleep at midnight with 30 volunteers, knowing we had made our commitment to Greg and to the mayor. At that point, we rested. We woke up in the morning. There were 100 people there on site, and then that level of commitment sustained or grew throughout the weekend until Sunday evening when the coast was clear and we knew we were in safe territory. It was, but no surprise, right? This is West
Grand
Michigan,
Rapids.
and this is a community that is really quite practiced in coming together and putting our hands together and making wonderful things happen. I think that is a strength of our community that we have to continue to foster, because as we move forward, as we continue to see the impacts of climate change, and this flood was one of them, we'll have a lot of other opportunities for people to really make their place their home and their community theirs by taking action and helping protect their neighbors and our critical resources.
But for Zane and I as reporters, you know, we were at these news conferences, and once you start seeing sandbags, and then you ask how many sandbags, and this need for volunteers, and this is going on for a few days, you start to wonder, you know, how bad is this going to be? I know that you were in contact with the National Weather Service out at the airport. What were they telling you, and how was this progressing over a few days? And when we start to see sandbags being dropped off downtown on semi-trucks, you start to wonder what's heading this way.
On Thursday, April 18th, the predictions really were for a disaster, not just a mild flooding as we have been accustomed to periodically here. As much as 7 feet higher than anything we had seen before, or at least recently. We were at our highest level of alert. We were asking everyone we knew to help us out, and every contractor and vendor that had the ability were doing that. And one of our partners, WEMEAC, we contacted them. They were able to corral volunteers. We had engineers calculating how many sandbags we would need depending on the river height. We wanted to have 150,000 bags to make them available not only for us, but for people to protect their own homes. Fortunately, we didn't need all of those bags, but I just can't relate to you how seriously we took this.
Was there a sense, though, you know, had those predictions panned out?
Yeah.
Where were your areas of concerns? I've had a chance to look at some of the old blueprints of the river cutaways and also the floodplains. I mean, it looks like the west side would have been vulnerable.
Well, in 1904, the west side was underwater all the way up to the zoo. But what we were focused on this time was our wastewater treatment plant. Just to recommission the plant, the hard dollar cost we estimate at $40 million. The environmental impact would have been devastating. The plant would have been shut down for approximately 30 days, so none of us, not just in Grand Rapids, but in a large service area surrounding Grand Rapids, would have been able to shower or flush our toilet for 30 days. Businesses that rely on water for their business, and there are many food processors in the area, it's one of our largest industries, would not have been able to operate. It would have had an incredibly devastating impact on this community. The mayor mentioned in those news conferences Thunder Bay, Ontario, a plant 1/7 the size of ours. It was flooded. They had to shut it down. It took 30 days to recommission it. And they ended up suffering $800 million in private lawsuits against the city. We averted that, and only because we took every precaution we could.
And you brought in a newer system to help fortify.
Yeah, it was cool.
Well, and we're showing photos throughout this show, so
Yeah.
people get to see it at home.
Yeah.
Just kind of explain the system in place,
Well,
and are you considering keeping it out there at this point?
We cannot keep what was exactly installed. It has a shelf life of approximately 3 years. We have asked an engineering firm to see if it could be incorporated into a more permanent solution. That is, maybe other soils or materials are added to it. But it was amazing. Instead of filling sandbags, one little square foot at a time, you're filling burrito bags, is what they called them. So it was amazing.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back. The practice of hydraulic fracturing or fracking has seen an explosion of new wells extracting natural gas and oil across West Michigan. Job creation and an increased supply should mean lower prices for consumers, but there are those who argue the process uses far too much water and pollutes the environment. We'll discuss the pros and cons of hydraulic fracturing on West Michigan Week. And thank you for joining us on West Michigan Week. On the panel, flying solo, Pete Daly, Grand Rapids Business Journal.
Patrick,
How are you, sir?
very fine, thanks.
All right. And our guest, Sid Jansma Jr., President, CEO of Wolverine Gas and Oil Corporation.
Thank you for having me.
And Nick Nortier, Committee to Ban Fracking in Michigan. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
It has been front and center. Fracking, I think the first time it was on my radar were some of the stories that were coming out of Pennsylvania a few years ago. We'll get into regulation in a little bit. But I think for the viewer at home who maybe knows a little bit about fracturing, perhaps has taken a position here, let's just go through the basics and the history in this state so we get a better understanding of it. Sid, you're the pro here. I mean, this goes back to 1925 in Michigan.
The first wells drilled in Michigan were 1925. The first wells fracked in Michigan were 1955. And since then, there have been thousands of wells fracked. So what is fracking, though, or how does it affect the state of Michigan? I'd like to start out just by pointing this, and I'm going to be very brief and trust you to ask the questions.
Are we going to look at the Michigan Basin here?
If you could look at the Michigan Basin, you can see that there's our beautiful mitten that we all live in and just love. But also, it's called the Michigan Basin because geologically, we're walking on the surface, but underneath, it's shaped like a soup bowl. And it's deep in the middle near Mount Pleasant, and it's shallow on the edges near Bay City or Holland, Michigan, or whatever. And so the hydraulic fracturing is occurring where water is pumped deep down into the ground, into those lower strata that you see colored blue or pink, which are 10 or 12 or 15,000 feet down in the ground. Hydraulic fracturing occurs in rocks that are shallower also.
Well, let's take a look at the fracturing process itself. I believe we have some video of that too, if we want to put that up on the screen here.
Hydraulic fracturing is using water, therefore hydraulic, to pump down to these rocks that are many feet down in the ground. The purpose of the hydraulic fracturing is to split the rock apart so that the oil and gas that is trapped in the rock is able to come out and come to the surface and be produced. The hydraulic fracturing is done down a well that has been drilled from the surface of the ground down to the depth. And the key thing that we need to observe is that the wells that are drilled use many strings of pipe and cement to protect the fresh water that's here in the state of Michigan. The regulations here in the state provide that when we drill a well, we must drill past the last freshwater zone and then set a string of pipe and cement in that string of pipe. And then the industry also many times cements in one or two strings of pipe after that initial string. So there are many times 3 strings of pipe down in a well to protect the fresh water from what's happening down below.
Do you mean pipes within pipes?
Yes, I mean pipes within pipes. The exterior pipe, the first one can be 16 inches, the next one can be about 12 inches, and then 7.5 inches, and then 5 inches. And between each of those pipes is cement that goes right up against initially the formation that you drilled, but then against the pipe, the next string of pipe. And so hydraulic fracturing is when you pump down the last pipe that you set in the ground, and you pump with water and sand, and hydraulic fracturing is 99% water and sand. The sand many times comes from Michigan. It could come from other places. That water and sand then has certain chemicals added to it that, for instance, make it slick. What makes things slick? Soap suds. That will make things slick so that it can pump without having as much friction, without having a soap suds material in it. It'll have a material in it that will keep the bacteria from growing, and it'll have different materials, and all those materials are about 0.5 to 1% of the volume. So at the surface of the ground, it's called hydraulic fracturing because you filled your well now with water and sand, and then you pump it in under pressure, and once you reach a certain pressure on the surface of the ground, the rock 2 miles down or wherever it is will gradually start to break in little fractures. And those fractures will travel 200 or 300 or 400 feet or whatever, but they never come up to the surface of the ground ever. There have been 12,000 wells fractured in the state of Michigan, and none of them today have polluted the groundwater.
So that seems to be the issue, is the chemical component. And I know that companies don't really want to disclose that. So what are the regulations when it comes to this, I guess, cocktail of chemicals that are used?
Yes. Hydraulic fracturing is regulated by every state where it occurs. Michigan is not unique in regulating it. All the states regulate it. Michigan requires that when a hydraulic fracturing process occurs, the MSDS sheets, Material Safety Data Sheets is what they're called, and they're used in every industry here in the state of Michigan. Those MSDS must be on location so that if something happens where somebody would have a question, what is being pumped into here, the chemicals are right there and they're listed. When the fracture job is completed, the operator must then file in writing what chemicals they used, what MSDSs they used. Some of the chemicals are combined in ways that some companies will use a little more of this one and a little less of that one, and we don't necessarily know what their exact percentage is, but we do know that 99 to 99.5% of everything pumped is water and sand.
I want to get Nick in here, because I know you've been listening, and tell us a little bit about a committee to ban fracking in Michigan, and where do you see things here? Obviously, it's through a different lens.
I see things through an environmental lens, definitely. Mainly, we're just concerned about the chemicals that are used, about the sheer volume of water that's used, where this water comes from, depleted water tables, millions and millions of gallons of water pumped down and laced with all these chemicals to produce this gas. But how, where can you get all that water, and how can you replace it once it's been used, once it's been tainted with all those chemicals?
And that's an important piece of this. I know water use is an issue across the country. Conservation of water, it is a finite resource in this country. How much water is used in general with one wellhead to draw out the natural gas and the oil?
Okay. Hydraulic fracturing occurs on wells that are big and small. A small hydraulic fracturing job could use 100,000 gallons of water. A large hydraulic fracturing job could use 20 million gallons of water. So there's quite a range. The water, in order to be used in the state of Michigan, we are required to use what they call a Water Withdrawal Assessment Tool, WWAT. And that's a tool that the Geological Survey Division of the state of Michigan has come up with that makes all of us evaluate where we get our water from and what will be the significance of taking that water out of the aquifer. So that is studied and used before a hydraulic fracturing job ever occurs. Our goal is to conserve the water in this state. And I personally was born and raised here in Grand Rapids, and I love being here, and I want to see that water protected as much as anybody else. So the state has some very good regulations for the analysis of the use of the water.
Pete, can you give me one more? Can I
Well,
keep going?
Go
ahead.
I have a question for either one of you gentlemen. It occurs to me that there is a company in Michigan that certainly has a lot at stake in this issue. And that would be Nestle. It's a Swiss firm, but they own a lot of food businesses in the United States. They own Ice Mountain, the big bottling plant up in Mecosta County, and they use a lot of water. They were subjected to criticism years ago for how much they use. Have either of you gentlemen ever heard of the Ice Mountain people or Nestle saying anything about fracking in Michigan?
I haven't yet heard anything from them, but I'm definitely curious to see what they would have to say, because their business relies 100% on clean water.
Right. I would think that if they were concerned, but I don't know how they operate. Maybe, Sid, you never heard?
I have not heard Nestle say one negative thing on hydraulic fracturing.
Okay.
I just want to jump in on this water issue here, and that is how much of that water can be reclaimed or cleaned in some way, or once it's been tainted, is it of no use and it has to be pumped, below?
down there?
Well, in the state of Michigan, the water that is used for hydraulic fracturing comes back, a good bit of it comes back out of the well. But in the state of Michigan, we must put that water in a steel tank and then dispose of it down approved saltwater disposal wells that are approved by the federal and state government. And so that water never gets into the environment. It goes right from the well itself to an approved disposal well.
But then it never really returns
Yeah, I was
to,
gonna ask,
to
is
the
it
water
lost
table,
then
though,
for
does
good?
it?
Well, that, of course, that specific molecule of water never returns. But the good news is that a natural gas well, like is being drilled in this state, that will produce 3 to 5 billion cubic feet of natural gas, when that natural gas is burned, it creates water and carbon dioxide. And a natural gas well that produces about 5 billion cubic feet of water will produce about twice as much water of clean water into the atmosphere when people burn the natural gas than was used in the hydraulic fracking process.
But how much? I mean, that seems like a very small amount.
No, I'm saying to you, the gas that is produced from that well will generate twice as much water as was used to fracture that well. So it's not a zero net gain or a loss. When we as consumers burn that natural gas, I mean, Nick and I both know the result of combustion is natural gas
that's
is
released in
water
the
and carbon
atmosphere.
dioxide. And that water is released into the atmosphere, that water becomes rain, and the carbon dioxide goes in the atmosphere too, and that's not good that we have lots of it going in, and we're all watching that. But natural gas releases far less carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than does coal or oil or a lot of other things.
All right, I'm not a scientist, but I'll look into that one.
You look into it.
For Nick. Nick, does your organization have any cases here in Michigan where fracking has, caused problems with people's wells?
There's been one that I've recently heard about in Kalkaska where the WWAT, the water assessment, was way off, and they had to take, I think, 2 or 3 million gallons of water from the city of Kalkaska's water supply. They had to take that right from the people, and like you said, like our water is a shared resource for all of Michigan.
You say they, you mean the drilling company had to take it
Yeah.
from the city water supply?
I'm just curious about the footprint here, right? I mean, you have a well footprint that's not very big, but the infrastructure that goes into that, as far as transporting water and everything else, what are the dynamics of that? What is the cost that goes into it? How does it impact a community?
The well that Nick is bringing up, I'm familiar with. It's the Westerman 129. And the only reason I'm familiar is it was written about in the Grand Rapids Press because they bought some of their water from the village of Kalkaska. I asked about that and found out that they were allowed to drill 4 water wells right on location to produce the water for their hydraulic fracture job. So they were producing the water right there on location. One of their 4 wells, they were not able to get a pump down the well. And so all of a sudden they had 25% of their water supply gone until they drilled a new well. They started drilling their new water well, but they needed some water right then, and so they bought it from the village of Kalkaska. And of course, I would imagine that water had to get trucked. But many times, as they were using there, the water is produced in Michigan right on location. Now, in many other states, you can't produce the water on location because it isn't there. But in this state, we do have copious amounts of water, and it was produced right there on location.
All right, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, our discussion on fracking will continue in just 1 minute.